Most people who have read the Bible, or who have watched the previous episodes in this series, assume they know what Satan is: a fallen angel. The one who rebelled against God before time, who was cast from heaven in a single cataclysmic moment of pride, who became the adversary of humanity and the source of evil in the world. And most of those same people assume that the watchers of the Book of Enoch are simply another version of the same story, older, stranger, more mythologically elaborate, but essentially the same event. Different names, different details, the same essential fall. They are not. They are two completely different theological traditions, describing two completely different kinds of transgression, produced by two completely different communities for two completely different purposes. And the decision to treat them as one, to collapse both into the figure of the singular rebel devil, is one of the most consequential theological simplifications in the history of Western religion. Not because it was malicious, but because it required each tradition to mean something it was never built to mean. And what each one was actually built to mean was more precise, more unsettling, and more theologically interesting than anything the merger produced. Before we go further, here is what you need to hold in your mind for everything that follows. In the Hebrew Bible, in Job, in Zechariah, in Numbers, Satan is not a fallen angel. He is not a rebel. He is not a cosmic adversary who was expelled from heaven in a moment of pride before the world began. He is a prosecuting attorney in the divine court. The word Satan in Hebrew is a title, not a name. It means the accuser, the one who brings charges, the one whose function in the heavenly assembly is to challenge, to test, to put the case against. In the book of Job, the Satan walks into the divine assembly and challenges God about a human being. God listens to him, engages with him, and the entire story proceeds from that exchange. This is not the devil of Western Christianity. This is a legal officer of the heavenly court, doing his job within a system that requires him. The watchers of the Book of Enoch are something completely different. They are divine beings who chose desire over obedience, who descended to earth not out of pride or rebellion, but out of want, who took human wives, produced hybrid offspring, transmitted forbidden knowledge, and corrupted the physical world in ways that made the flood not a punishment but a necessity. Two falls, two figures, two entirely different theological accounts of how transgression enters a world that God made. Today we are going to follow both of them all the way through, not to choose between them, but to understand what each one actually is, where each one actually comes from, and what the tradition destroyed when it decided they were the same. The word appears more than 20 times in the Hebrew Bible, and in almost every instance it functions as a common noun, not a proper name. Ha-Satan, the accuser, the one who opposes. It is a role description in the same way that a judge or a priest is a role description. It tells you what the figure does, not who he permanently is. The first and most developed appearance is in the book of Job, and it is worth dwelling on what actually happens there, because the text is almost nothing like the story that later tradition made of it. The scene opens in the divine assembly. The sons of God, the heavenly council, the celestial court that surrounds the throne, have gathered before the Lord. And among them comes Satan, the accuser. He is not introduced as a rebel or a fallen being. He is not introduced as an adversary of God. He arrives at a divine gathering to which he apparently belongs. And when God asks where he has been, he answers directly and without ceremony, walking to and fro in the earth, and walking up and down in it. He has been surveying the world. This is his function. He is the one who watches, who scrutinizes, who reports. Then God raises the subject of Job. Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one like him on the earth, blameless, upright, fearing God, turning away from evil. And the Satan's response is not demonic malice. It is a legal challenge. Does Job fear God for nothing? You have built a hedge around him and around his household and everything he has. You have blessed everything he does. Of course he is faithful. Remove the protection and he will curse you to your face. This is prosecutorial logic. The Satan is not attacking Job out of hatred. He is raising a legitimate question about the nature of Job's faithfulness. Is it genuine, or is it contingent on reward? God, rather than dismissing the challenge, grants it. The test proceeds, and the Satan operates throughout, within divine permission, within divine limits, as a figure whose function the heavenly court structure requires. This raises the first question that this part must leave genuinely open. If the Satan of Job is a member of the divine council doing his appointed work, what does that say about the theology of divine justice that Job is operating within? And if that theology was later suppressed, if the prosecutorial Satan was absorbed into the singular rebel devil, what did the suppression cost? The second appearance is in the 3rd chapter of Zechariah, and it is equally precise. The high priest Joshua stands before the angel of the Lord, and the Satan stands at his right hand to accuse him. This is a courtroom. Joshua is the defendant. The Satan is the prosecutor. The angel of the Lord rebukes the Satan, not because the accusation is false, but because the Lord has chosen Jerusalem, and Joshua is a brand plucked from the fire. The accuser is silenced not through his own defeat, but through divine prerogative. And then Joshua's filthy garments are removed and replaced with clean ones. The ritual of purification proceeds. Notice what is and is not happening here. The Satan is in the right place. He is performing a legitimate function. He is not cast out of the scene as a demonic intruder. He is present as a necessary part of a legal and ritual process. His silencing is not his destruction. It is a ruling. The third appearance is the most linguistically transparent, and it comes in Numbers 22. Balaam the seer is traveling to curse Israel at the request of Balak, king of Moab. God is displeased. The angel of the Lord stations himself in the road to block Balaam's path. And the text uses the word explicitly. The angel of the Lord positioned himself in the road as a Satan, as an adversary, as an obstacle. The word here is used in its most basic sense. The angel is not the Satan. He is functioning as a Satan, performing the role of opposition, blocking a path that should not be taken. The word is a verb, almost. It describes an action and a function, not an identity. 3 appearances, 3 different contexts, 3 different figures performing the same essential function: opposition, challenge, accusation, obstruction. In none of them is the Satan a rebel against God. In none of them is he fallen, expelled, or permanently condemned. In all of them, he operates within the structure of the divine court, performing a function that the structure itself requires. To understand why this matters, you have to understand what the divine council tradition in the Hebrew Bible actually is. The sons of God, Elohim, divine beings, members of the heavenly assembly, appear throughout the Hebrew scriptures in contexts that modern readers, trained by centuries of monotheistic theology to read the text as strictly singular, tend to flatten or explain away. In Psalm 82, God stands in the divine assembly and renders judgment among the Elohim. He accuses them of judging unjustly, of showing partiality to the wicked, and ultimately declares that they will die like men. This is not a metaphor. It is a scene in the heavenly court, and it presupposes a populated heavenly court, one that has structure, hierarchy, function, and the capacity for failure. The divine council is the theological world in which the prosecutorial Satan makes complete sense. He is one function among many in a structured celestial bureaucracy. This is the world that Job inhabits. The Satan who arrives at the divine assembly in Job is not an intruder or an anomaly. He is an officer of the court, exercising a function the court requires, and doing so with the permission, even the engagement, of the one who presides over it. When God says to the Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job?" the question is not naive. It is almost a provocation. God is raising the subject of the one human the accuser cannot successfully prosecute. And what follows is not the devil tormenting Job in defiance of God. It is God permitting a test that the accuser initiated through a legitimate challenge within a legal framework that God himself established. The question that should be gathering now, the question that Part 5 will try to answer, is not where the rebel Satan came from. It is what kind of theology requires an accuser in the divine court, and what kind of theology prefers a singular rebel locked outside it. These are not the same theology, and the choice between them is not cosmetic. The tradition of the Watchers does not begin in the Book of Enoch. It begins in 6 verses of the 6th chapter of Genesis, and those 6 verses have been generating theological controversy for 2.5 millennia. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives from among them, whomever they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. 6 verses. No explanation of who the sons of God are. No account of how this is possible. No resolution of what it means for divine beings to desire human women and act on that desire. The text moves immediately to the Lord seeing that human wickedness was great on the earth, and to the decision to bring the flood. The Book of Enoch is, among other things, the most sustained ancient attempt to fill in what those 6 verses omit. And what it produces is not a variation on the Satan tradition. It is a completely different theological account of how transgression enters the world. The Watchers, the Aramaic term preserved in Daniel and in the Enochic literature, are divine beings assigned to watch over humanity. Their name defines their function. They are observers, guardians, and their fall begins not with pride, not with a rebellion against divine authority, but with seeing. Semyaza, who becomes their leader in the descent, sees the daughters of men, and he wants them. What happens next is structurally unlike any other fall narrative in the tradition. Semyaza does not act alone and unilaterally. He goes to the others 200 watchers, according to the text, and he proposes the descent. But he goes to them with a problem already acknowledged. He knows that what he is proposing is transgression. He says so explicitly, "I fear you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone shall be guilty of a great sin." Semyaza is not a figure of self-deluding pride. He is a figure who knows exactly what he is doing, who fears isolation in the guilt, and who therefore binds his companions to him through a collective oath. All 200 of them swear together on Mount Hermon. The name Hermon, the text notes, comes from the Hebrew word for oath, for the ban, for the thing placed under a curse. The geography is the theology. They descend at a place whose very name means they have placed themselves under judgment. The oath is not a detail. It is the theological signature of this fall. The watchers do not fall through the pride of a single figure who refuses submission. They fall through collective desire, bound by mutual guilt, each one complicit in what none of them could have done alone. This is a theology of shared transgression, of a fall that is distributed across a community rather than concentrated in a single rebel will. There is no watcher who stands apart from the others and says, "I will not do this." There is no dissent within the 200. They go together, bound by an oath sworn at a mountain, whose name means they have already cursed themselves, and they descend. The contrast with how later tradition imagines the fall of the devil is worth holding here. The Augustinian devil falls in isolation, through a private act of will, the turning of a singular intelligence toward itself rather than toward God. He is alone in his transgression in a way that makes him uniquely, permanently responsible. The watchers of Enoch fall in the opposite structural mode, collectively, by consensus, through a mechanism of mutual accountability that is almost, the word is uncomfortable, but accurate, democratic. Semyaza could not have compelled the others. He needed their agreement. He feared their refusal. The 200 had to choose together. And in choosing together, they created a theological category of evil that the singular prideful rebel does not accommodate. The evil of collective complicity, of communities that transgress because they made an agreement to transgress and then kept it. Semyaza leads the watchers to human women, and they take wives, and the women bear children. And the children are the Nephilim, giants, the text says, and afterward men of renown. But in the Enochic account, they are more specifically horrifying than that. The Nephilim consume everything human civilization produces. They eat the food, then the livestock, then the humans themselves. Then, the text says, with a kind of escalating dread, they eat each other. The corruption the watchers introduce into the world is not ideological. It is physical. It is incarnate. It manifests in the bodies of their hybrid offspring, in the violence they enact, in the scream of the earth under the weight of what they do. This physicality is the watcher tradition's most distinctive theological contribution, and it is one of the things most thoroughly erased by the merger with the Satan tradition. The Satan of the Hebrew Bible operates in courts and assemblies. He challenges, accuses, tests, but he does so through language, through legal process, through the structures of divine governance. His effects on the world are mediated by permission and procedure. The watchers, by contrast, are in bodies. They descended physically. They took physical wives. They produced physical children. The corruption they introduced is in the flesh of the world, in the genetic and civilizational fabric of humanity. in the literal bodies of beings that were never supposed to exist. This is a different account of how evil operates, not as a challenge from outside creation, but as a contamination from within it, distributed through offspring and transmitted through knowledge in ways that change what humanity is rather than merely what it does. And here the second leadership figure enters, and with him a completely different dimension of the transgression. Azazel, the name means roughly the scapegoat, the one sent away, is not primarily a figure of desire. He is a figure of knowledge. While Semyaza organizes the descent, Azazel teaches. He teaches men the making of swords, shields, and breastplates. He teaches women the art of cosmetics, eyeshadow, bracelets, the adorning of the face with things that did not exist before he showed them. He teaches the cutting of roots and their uses. He transmits to humanity a curriculum of civilizational knowledge that the divine order had withheld. The text of 1st Enoch holds both figures simultaneously. It does not resolve them into one. And the result is that the Watcher tradition carries two distinct accounts of what the transgression actually was. Was it desire? The act of divine beings crossing the boundary between heaven and earth to take what they wanted? Or was it knowledge, the transmission of technology and cosmetic arts that changed the nature of human civilization? These are not the same sin, and they are not the same theological problem. But before developing that tension further, there is a third element of the Watcher tradition that must be named, because it shapes everything that follows. The earth cries out. The Nephilim's violence, Azazel's transmissions, the corruption spreading through humanity. The earth itself brings charges. The cry of the earth ascends to heaven. And the four archangels, Michael, Sariel, Raphael, Gabriel, hear it and carry the accusation before the throne of God. This is where the two traditions, the prosecutorial tradition and the Watcher tradition, briefly touch. There is an accusation, there is a divine response. But in the Enochic account, the accuser is not a member of the divine court. It is the creation itself, bearing witness to what has been done to it. And the response is not a legal ruling, it is the flood. The divine response to the Watchers is specific and severe. Raphael is sent to bind Azazel, hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness of a desert pit, where he will remain until the day of judgment. Michael is sent to bind Semyaza and his companions under the hills of the earth, in darkness, until their judgment. And Gabriel is sent to the Nephilim, not to redeem them, but to destroy them, to set them against each other so that they eliminate themselves in warfare. The Watchers are not expelled from a heavenly court. They are imprisoned in the earth itself. Their punishment is not exile upward, not the casting out from heaven that the Satan tradition does not even describe, but that later tradition invented. It is entombment downward. They are sealed into the creation they corrupted, and they wait. The Book of Enoch is not a unified text. It is a collection of traditions assembled over centuries, and it shows. And nowhere does it show more clearly, or more theologically productively, than in the way it handles the question of which Watcher bears primary responsibility for the corruption of the earth. The text gives two different answers. It gives them without apology, and it does not resolve them. In the Semyaza strand, the primary transgression is relational. Semyaza desires. He organizes. he brings the community of watchers into a collective act that none of them could have accomplished or survived alone. The guilt is distributed. The problem is not what the watchers teach, it is what they do. They cross a boundary that should not be crossed. They produce offspring that do not belong to either category they came from. The corruption flows from the act of mixture, from the violation of the division between divine and human that the created order was built upon. In the Azazel strand, the primary transgression is epistemological. Azazel does not merely desire human women. He changes the nature of human knowledge. He gives humanity access to things it was not supposed to have: the technology of war, the arts of self-beautification, the manipulation of natural materials for destructive ends. The corruption in this strand is not biological. It is civilizational. Humanity becomes something different because of what Azazel teaches it. And God holds Azazel specifically responsible not for the mixing of categories, but for the transformation of human consciousness. The divine indictment of Azazel in 1 Enoch is worth staying with. The whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. This is not an indictment of desire, it is an indictment of transmission. The problem is not that a divine being wanted something it should not have had. The problem is that a divine being gave humanity something it was not ready to receive. These two strands produce two genuinely different theologies of evil. In the Semyaza strand, the origin of corruption is transgressive desire, the crossing of a boundary by beings who knew the boundary was real and crossed it anyway. Evil enters the world through a failure of restraint, through collective complicity, through the consequences of producing what the categories of creation never intended to produce. In the Azazel strand, the origin of corruption is forbidden knowledge, the premature or illegitimate transmission of civilizational capacities that transform humanity's relationship to violence, to self, and to the natural world. What is extraordinary about the text is that it preserves both without choosing. The traditions existed side by side. The community that produced the Enochic literature apparently found both accounts useful, both theologically live, both worth carrying forward. And this has an implication for how we read the structure of evil in the Enochic world. It is not monolithic. It does not have a single source or a single cause. It enters through desire and through knowledge simultaneously, through the body and through the mind, through the corruption of creation's categories, and through the corruption of creation's capacities. Modern scholarship on the Enochic tradition, particularly Annette Yoshiko Reed's work on fallen angels in Second Temple Judaism, and Philip Alexander's analysis of the demonological framework of 1 Enoch, has consistently emphasized this dual structure as a compositional signature rather than an editorial inconsistency. The tension is the point. The tradition is not trying to give a single clean answer to where evil came from. It is trying to hold two genuine theological problems in the same frame. This is precisely what the merger of the Watcher tradition with the Satan tradition would eventually flatten. When both traditions are collapsed into the singular, prideful rebel, the specificity of the Watcher account, its insistence on desire and knowledge as distinct mechanisms of corruption, its preservation of the Semyaza/Azazel tension as a genuine debate, disappears entirely. The devil becomes the origin of everything. And in becoming the origin of everything, he explains nothing with the precision that either original tradition managed. The Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Septuagint, produced across several centuries beginning in the 3rd century BCE, is where the first significant linguistic transformation occurs. The Hebrew ha-Satan, the definite article and the functional noun, begins in many passages to be rendered as ho-diabolos, the slanderer, the accuser, the one who throws across, who interposes himself, who obstructs. The translation is not wrong. Diabolos captures the prosecutorial function accurately. But something happens in the move from Hebrew to Greek that is worth attending to. In Hebrew, hey Satan is unambiguously a role description. The definite article makes it clear. The accuser, the one who performs this function. In Greek, ho diabolos retains that quality in the Septuagint, but Greek lacks the same strong convention of using the definite article to signal function rather than identity. And as the figure migrates across centuries and texts and communities, the article begins to stabilize not as a marker of function, but as a marker of proper name. The accuser becomes the accuser, and then finally just the devil. The process is not instantaneous, and the Septuagint is not its endpoint. The Second Temple literature that bridges the Hebrew Scriptures and the New Testament shows the figure in a state of theological transition. In the Book of Jubilees, a retelling of Genesis and Exodus, probably composed in the 2nd century BCE, a figure named Mastema, the prince of hostility, performs functions that overlap with the Satan of Job. He accuses, he tests, he is granted divine permission to operate against humans. But he is also more persistently adversarial than the Satan of Job, more fixed in his enmity, more clearly conceived as a being whose hostility defines his permanent character rather than his current function. The figure is developing. It is being written and rewritten by communities with specific theological needs. And each community's needs pull the figure slightly further from his origins as a prosecutorial officer and slightly closer to his destination as a cosmic rebel. The Qumran community, the Dead Sea Scrolls community, pushed the development further in a different direction. Their figure of Belial, the prince of darkness, presides over a domain of evil spirits in a framework of cosmic dualism. 2 spirits, 2 kingdoms. A war between light and darkness that is cosmological rather than merely legal. The prosecutorial officer who challenges Job within the divine court has become, in the Qumran texts, the commander of an opposing army. The divine council context has been replaced by a battlefield. The New Testament accelerates this process with remarkable speed and consistency. The temptation narratives in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew 4 and Luke 4, present a singular adversarial figure who tests Jesus in the wilderness. The figure is called both Ho Diabolos and Ho Satanas, and the 2 names are used interchangeably within the same narrative sequence. This is already a merger. The Greek and Hebrew terms, originally separate in their textual traditions, are functioning as synonyms for the same being. And this being is not a prosecutorial officer of the divine court. He is the one who takes Jesus to the pinnacle of the temple and to the top of an exceeding high mountain and offers him the kingdoms of the world. This is not a legal challenge. This is a direct temptation by a figure who apparently has authority over the kingdoms of the world to dispose of as he chooses. The question of where this authority came from, how a member of the divine council came to hold dominion over the kingdoms of the earth, is not answered in the synoptic narrative. It is assumed. The prehistory that would explain it is gestured toward, but not narrated. The Gospel of John pushes further. The devil is named as a murderer from the beginning, as the father of lies, as one who has no standing in the truth. The language of origin, from the beginning, is significant. The figure is not merely doing his current job. He has been this way since before the world, as we know it, was constructed. The Gospel of John is gesturing toward a prehistory that the text does not fully narrate but clearly assumes, a moment before history in which the devil became what he is. Revelation completes the consolidation. The great dragon, the ancient serpent, the one who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. All of these titles are applied to the same being in the 12th chapter of Revelation, which also describes a war in heaven in which Michael and his angels fight the dragon. And the dragon and his angels are cast down to the earth. The language of casting down, of expulsion from heaven, of a war that precedes and explains the current condition of the world. This is the mythological grammar that the later tradition would receive. And it is not the grammar of Job. Where is the prosecutorial Satan of the Hebrew Bible in this sequence? He has been absorbed, the title has become a name, the function has become an identity. And the identity has been supplied with a prehistory, the war in heaven, the expulsion, the permanent enmity that the Hebrew texts never provide. But it is worth noting what the New Testament does not do. It does not, with any clarity or consistency, narrate the Watcher story as the origin of the devil. The Watcher tradition is present in the New Testament. The second letter of Peter and the letter of Jude both reference divine beings who sinned and are being kept in chains of darkness until judgment. And the language echoes the Enochic account of the imprisoned watchers with enough precision that a shared source tradition is almost certainly in view. But these figures are not identified with Satan. They are a separate category. The letter of Jude cites the Book of Enoch directly, explicitly, as authoritative. It is one of the only New Testament texts to name Enoch by name and to quote the tradition it is drawing on. And even there, in the text most thoroughly saturated by Enochic material, the fallen watchers in the figure of Satan are not the same being. They remain distinct. The New Testament absorbs the two traditions at different rates and into different frameworks. Satan becomes the singular adversary by one root. The watchers are referenced, acknowledged, and then allowed to remain in their separate category, waiting in their darkness. For a period, both traditions coexist in early Christian literature without being fully merged. The full merger, the decision to make Satan and the Watchers ultimately aspects of the same story, is largely a patristic achievement, and it required a specific theological argument to accomplish. The figure who more than any other constructed the Western Christian devil is Augustine of Hippo, writing in the late 4th and early 5th century. And to understand what Augustine built, you have to understand what problem he was trying to solve. Augustine's central theological preoccupation is the origin of evil in a world made by a good God. If God is good and omnipotent, and the world is his creation, how does evil exist? The Manichaean answer, which Augustine himself had held before his conversion is that evil is a co-eternal principle, a darkness that exists alongside and in opposition to the light. Augustine rejects this absolutely. Evil is not a substance. It is not a co-eternal principle. It is a privation, the absence of good, the turning away from good, by a will that was made good and chose otherwise. And this is where the theological requirements of Augustine's system determine what the devil must be. If evil is not a substance but a privation, a turning away, then the origin of evil must be a will that turned away, a free will that chose itself over God. And the first such will, in Augustine's framework, must be the devil. The devil's fall is not a fall of desire. It is not a fall of knowledge transmission. It is a fall of pride, of a will that chose its own excellence over its dependence on God. This is why Augustine's reading of Isaiah 14, which is the Lucifer passage, becomes the foundational text for the devil's prehistory. The king of Babylon's pride, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High, becomes the interior monologue of the devil before the world began. The prosecutorial Satan of Job does not fit this framework. A legal officer who brings charges within a system God ordained is not a being whose will has turned away from God. He is performing his function. His existence is not an instance of privation. He is doing what he was made to do. So the Satan of Job cannot be the devil of Augustine's system. And gradually, in the patristic readings, he ceases to be. The passages in Job are reread as evidence of the devil's malice, rather than as evidence of a prosecutorial role within the divine court. The hedge around Job is reread as something the devil resents, rather than something he is probing through legitimate challenge. The entire context of the divine assembly is read through the lens of a being who is already condemned, already adversarial, already the enemy, and the prosecutorial structure that the Hebrew text built is invisible within that reading. The Watcher tradition fares differently. Augustine does not primarily use the Watcher tradition to construct the devil's prehistory. He uses Isaiah. But the Watcher tradition gets absorbed into the devil's domain through a different route. The sons of God of Genesis 6, whom the Enochic tradition identified as divine beings who fell through desire, become in the dominant patristic reading either humans, the Sethite interpretation, in which the sons of God are the godly line of Seth, and the daughters of men are the corrupted line of Cain, or demons operating under the devil's authority. Either way, the autonomous theological logic of the Watcher tradition is dissolved. The Watchers cease to be a distinct category of transgression, beings who fell through collective desire and collective oath, whose punishment is imprisonment in the earth, whose offspring and transmissions produce a specific kind of civilizational corruption. They become either a misreading of human genealogy or a subplot in the devil's campaign against humanity. What is lost in this merger is not merely detail. What is lost is the specificity of two distinct theological accounts of how evil enters a world that God made, and what those accounts say about the nature of transgression, the nature of divine justice, and the nature of human vulnerability. The prosecutorial Satan of the Hebrew Bible carries a theology of divine justice that works through process. God is not a monarch who simply decrees. He presides over an assembly that includes an adversarial voice. The accuser has standing. His challenges are heard. the testing of Job, proceeds with divine permission. This is a theology in which justice is procedural, in which the good are subject to legitimate scrutiny, in which the existence of an adversarial function within the divine order is not an anomaly but a feature. It carries a very particular account of what it means for human faithfulness to be real. It must be tested. It must survive challenge. It must be proven rather than assumed. The Watchers of Enoch carry a theology of corruption that is embodied, collective, and dual. Evil enters not through a single proud will, but through a community of desire that swears itself into transgression together. The corruption it produces is not abstract. It is in the bodies of the Nephilim, in the civilizational knowledge Azazel transmits, in the physical cry of the earth under the weight of what has been done to it. This is a theology in which the vulnerability of creation is material as well as spiritual, in which the problem of evil is not solved by identifying the one rebel who turned away, but by confronting the multiple mechanisms through which the created order can be corrupted from within. Augustine's singular proud rebel is internally consistent. It answers the question of evil's origin cleanly, within a framework that serves the doctrine of free will and the account of original sin that the Western Church would build upon it. But it achieves its consistency at the cost of both traditions' specificity. The prosecutorial Satan becomes a rebel whose prosecution is really persecution. The desiring watchers become demons whose desire is subsumed into the devil's authority. It is archived, put away, made available only to those who read the texts that the tradition preserved but did not, for the most part, read. Modern scholarship has done the work of recovering that precision. Annette Yoshiko Reed's analysis of the fallen angel traditions in Second Temple Judaism traces the Watcher tradition as a self-contained theological world that existed and developed independently of the Satan tradition before the two were merged in the late Second Temple and early Christian periods. Philip Alexander's work on the demonological framework of First Enoch shows that the Enochic tradition had its own complete cosmology, its own account of the origin of evil, the structure of the heavens, the relationship between divine and human, that does not require the Satan tradition to be coherent. These are not marginal observations. They are recoveries of what was always in the texts, waiting to be read without the lens of the merger superimposed over them. And here is what that recovery reveals, and why it matters beyond the academic question of compositional history. The theology of the prosecutorial Satan implies a specific account of what God's justice is like. If the accuser has standing in the divine court, if God engages with the challenge to Job, permits the test, and waits for the outcome, then justice in this framework is not merely the sovereign decree of an omnipotent will. It is something that must be demonstrated, argued for, tested. Job's righteousness cannot simply be asserted. It must survive scrutiny. The Satan of Job is not the enemy of this process. He is the condition of its integrity. You cannot have a justice worth calling justice without the possibility that it can be challenged. The presence of an adversarial voice in the divine court is not evidence of a corruption in the heavenly order. It is evidence of a justice system that takes its own standards seriously enough to subject them to examination. This is a genuinely unsettling theology. And it is easy to understand why the tradition found it easier to replace it. A God who permits the testing of Job, who engages with the accuser's challenge, who allows suffering to proceed within divine permission while the outcome is still uncertain. This is a God whose relationship to justice is procedural and exposed in ways that the omnipotent sovereign of later Christian theology is not. The prosecutorial Satan's existence implies a God who can be argued with, who has built into the structure of divine governance a voice whose function is to raise the case against. The merger with the rebel devil eliminates that implication. The devil does not raise legitimate challenges. He makes illegitimate accusations. And God is not engaging with them. He is defeating them. The theology of divine engagement with accusation is replaced by the theology of divine victory over it. The theology of the Watcher Fall implies a comparably specific account of the nature of human vulnerability. The problem is not that humanity was tempted by a single rebel and fell. The problem is that the structure of creation is porous in ways that allow divine corruption to enter it from the top. The Watchers are not human. They are not fallen humans. They are divine beings whose transgression changes the nature of the human world from outside it, by penetrating it physically, by introducing categories of being, the Nephilim, and categories of knowledge, Azazel's transmissions, that were not supposed to exist. Human vulnerability in the Enochic framework is not primarily a moral failure of human will. It is a structural feature of a creation in which divine beings can choose to transgress its boundaries, and in which the consequences of that transgression are physical and civilizational rather than merely spiritual. Augustine's framework reverses this completely. In Augustine, the fundamental problem is human will, the will of Adam and Eve, inheriting the pattern set by the devil's prior act of will turning. The corruption of humanity is not a structural contamination from outside. It is a moral choice from within. And the singular rebel devil is the necessary origin point of that choice. The first will to turn, the one whose turning makes all subsequent turning possible. The Watchers, in this framework, have no necessary role. Their story, if it is read at all, becomes an episode in the devil's ongoing campaign, rather than a theologically distinct account of how divine transgression enters and corrupts the physical order. The Satan of Job is still in the text, walking to and fro in the earth, raising a legitimate question about the nature of human faithfulness before a God who takes the question seriously. The Watchers of Enoch are still in the text, descending to Mount Hermon under a collective oath, falling not from pride, but from desire, producing offspring and transmitting knowledge, and waiting in their earthen prisons for a judgment that the tradition says is coming. They were always different. They were always describing different problems. The Satan of the divine court describes a world in which justice requires an adversarial voice, in which the goodness of the faithful must survive challenge to be real, in which God himself engages with accusation rather than dismissing it. The Watchers describe a world in which the boundaries of creation are fragile, in which desire can corrupt not just individual souls, but the physical structure of civilization, in which evil is not a single rebel will, but a collective act that leaves its mark in the bodies of the children it produced and the knowledge it transmitted. The Western devil inherited both of their names without inheriting either of their theologies. He is the accuser who is no longer a prosecutorial officer. He is the one who fell from pride rather than desire, alone rather than collectively, from heaven in a war rather than to earth by an oath. The merger was a decision, not a discovery. And the two traditions it merged, each one precise, each one internally coherent, each one saying something specific about the nature of transgression and the nature of divine response, remain legible in the texts they came from. They are still saying different things,